Welcome to The Bo Show, the home of faith, family, and freedom. What is a global citizen? That is the subject of today's show. I'm sure that you've heard that neat little phrase before, but what does it really mean? I think when we hear the word global, it means several things. One, it makes reference to the fact that we are all supposed to be one human race. And that means that we should not be concerned with borders or national pride. Two, it also has a striking similarity to the word globalist, which of course would be a person, usually an elitist, who wants not just national power, but global power. The idea is that the whole globe can solve your problems, and that's when you get into who is doing the receiving and who is doing the giving. Thirdly, in being called global, it probably means that they are going to focus on the globe or planet Earth. And that means one issue, climate change. With climate change comes regulations, have and have-nots, redistribution of wealth and resources, and again, turning attention away from your own national dilemmas and maladies and focusing on the globe. I'd say the biggest example of a globalist intonation right now is Ukraine, where the globalists have placed a big emphasis on helping Ukraine in its war with Russia. But the devil is always in the details. What may seem like a no-brainer to help out the weaker underdog can be a boondoggle with vast financial interests at stake. Shockingly, according to Monthly Review Online, quote, the Ukrainian government mysteriously disappeared online records of its fundraising arrangement with the FTX crypto scam just days before the scandal erupted. The initiative claims to have raised $60 million for Ukraine. But where did the money go? Unquote. The same was true with the Persian Gulf-Iraq war. It seems like we are helping out poor little Kuwait from Saddam, but at what cost? And who is benefiting from it? It's never as simple as it seems. Well, Bill Gates, whom I have profiled before for being a shady citizen, not just a global one, is urging you to become a global citizen. Let's see how he framed it in 2015 in this YouTube video.
We want to ignite people's desire for connection. The power of digital technology can bring people together and break down barriers. That's where Global Citizen comes in, the way to connect millions of people and take action together to help create a better world. This year represents an incredible opportunity for people to show their support for these issues, to use their voice, to use their time, and to go beyond their own communities to connect with something larger. We need a movement of global citizens, from world leaders to people everywhere, to help solve the world's biggest problems. I've signed up. I hope you will too, and encourage your own network of people to become global citizens.
Now, the logo is a red O, and two things come to mind in terms of imagery. One is the fact that the globe is a round circle, but also O is a convenient symbol for Barack Obama and his campaign, who also has a striking globalist attribute. Here are Bill and Melinda Gates breaking the concept down even more.
Without many millions of global citizens, these issues are going to be neglected, and we won't make the progress we need to.
We often hear from people who say, well, I want to get engaged. What can I do to help? This could be a place that people can go to do that and actually be deeply engaged. If people act collectively, we can really solve big problems.
What did Melinda say again? Play that again.
If people act collectively, we can really solve big problems.
If people act collectively, well, that sounds a lot like collectivism, which is a fundamental tenet of socialism and communism. Bill Gates talks about those in need, but he's not focused on the citizens of the United States, for instance. He is focusing outside of borders. In the comments below that video, someone said, quote, I prefer to call you free communist, unquote. So you can see that this mission of theirs is to be global, not American. You could argue that this is the opposite of what Donald Trump did when he presented an America First campaign, which meant protecting our borders, decreasing human and drug trafficking, and boosting our economy so that we could remain energy independent and a world leader. He was skeptical about endless foreign aid. The Gateses are doing something quite different. They are focused on the globe, not America. Now, they have the wealth to do it, but it was America's capitalism that enabled them to acquire this wealth. Rather than speaking to the unique opportunities that America has clearly and obviously provided them, and helping future American entrepreneurs or American poor, they instead focus their energy outward. But so that we can truly be fair, let's go over to globalcitizen.org to find out more about what they are about and what they want to do. They focus on three main issues. The first is to defeat poverty. Here they focus on Africa, Asia, and Latin America. No mention of Americans living in poverty. For the latest info tab, they chose to use the symbol of a clenched fist. This symbol has a deep history, dating back to 1924 with the Communist Party in Germany, left-wingers from the Spanish Civil War, and of course, the Marxist Black Panther movement of the 1960s. Every movement that has the clenched fist is associated with socialism or communism, and usually with the notion of oppression. This is no mistake, and it's not subtle. The website talks about access to nutritious food. Bill Gates is buying up a bunch of farmland in the United States. He is the largest private farmland owner in the U.S., owning over 250,000 acres of farmland. The Land Report, which tracks land purchases, noticed a purchase of 14,500 acres of prime farmland in Washington state by an unknown LLC in Louisiana with just 2 employees. Turns out the investment comes from Cascade Investment LLC, which handles Bill Gates' fortune. Gates' future ideas might be found in a massive land purchase in 2017 in the Phoenix area, in which Gates wants to develop the smart city of Belmont, which will be a digital 5G mecca. Cascade Investment has been covered in a New York Times report concerning inappropriate workplace behavior. So Gates is buying up a bunch of land for speculative reasons. He has mentioned that his land ownership has nothing to do with his plans to save the planet, ironically. Because 50% of farmers do not own the land that they till, they will eventually come to just rent the land that they are farming. And the owner may just be Bill Gates. Furthermore, if agriculture counts for over 10% of carbon emissions, how can Bill invest so heavily in this if he's all about climate change and cutting carbon emissions? The second pillar of Global Citizen is defending the planet. So here they focus on the fact that the poorest countries contribute least to climate change, but also get impacted the most. So here again is going to be an oppressor-oppression narrative with the goal of redistribution of wealth. Nowhere can I find information about who the largest polluters are. They want to point the finger at developed nations, but they conspicuously leave out nations like China and India, 2 of the largest polluters. They also fail to mention that China is increasing its use of fossil fuels, especially as coal is necessary to mine the rare earth minerals that are supposed to make the planet greener, such as electric cars. Needless to say, they don't talk about lithium battery disposal either, which is an environmental consequence. The final pillar for Global Citizen is demand equity. The what tab of this pillar states individuals of color with disabilities and who identify as LGBTQIA+ are seeing increased threats to their health, safety, and rights. So basically, anyone that's not a straight white male. Now, if this area focused on Iranian girls, for instance, for what had happened recently to Mahsa Amini, sure, that's a worthy cause. But again, what is the end game here? Would it be to instigate the regime change necessary there? Equity, as I have explained in past shows, is not the same thing as equality. They sound the same, but they're different. Equity means there is a necessary reshuffling of the deck. It's not opportunity for all, it's how can we make the oppressed voice louder and their numbers greater? How can we target the perceived oppressor? How can we guilt them? And let's take Iran again. If Global Citizen wants to highlight LGBTQ people as disenfranchised, nowhere are they more demonized more than in a place like Iran. I saw a couple of actionable items on Iran, but once again, China was conspicuously absent from blame, especially regarding racial or religious persecution. I don't think Xi Jinping is a global citizen. You will also see the word climate justice, which combines their love for all things climate mixed with this equity concept. Well, okay, but who are the prime offenders here? The US has been steadily decreasing its carbon emissions. We're doing well. China and India have not. So those are their three main focus areas, and they have a 5-point recovery plan for the world. Inevitably, they focus one of those points on the pandemic and expanding the vaccine. Listen to how Bill and Melinda spoke about it in April of 2020.
Eventual end comes when we get a vaccine that protects all of us, not just in the US and the entire world. There's a lot of vaccine candidates that we're backing, and I'm optimistic by late next year, one of those will come out. And we need to make sure that gets out to everyone in the world.
That's right. Our response to this pandemic won't be effective unless it's equitable.
They pushed the vaccine right from the get-go and did not talk about the pandemic ending with proper treatments, but rather only it ending with the vaccine. That is because of their investment. As you know, Bill and Melinda Gates divorced in 2021. Speaking to Gayle King, Melinda Gates said this about her ex-husband's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
You know, it was also widely reported that Bill had a friendship or business or some kind of contact with Jeffrey Epstein, and that you were not, that was very upsetting to you. Did that play a role in the divorce at all in this process?
Yeah, as I said, it's not one thing, it was many things. But I did not like that he'd had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, no.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you made that clear to him?
I made that clear to him. I also met Jeffrey Epstein exactly one time.
Did you?
Yes, because I wanted to see who this man was. And I regretted it from the second I stepped in the door. He was abhorrent. He was evil personified. I had nightmares about it afterwards. So, you know, my heart breaks for these young women because that's how I felt. And here I'm an older woman. My God, I feel terrible for those young women. It's awful.
And you shared that with Bill, and he still continued to spend time with him?
Any of the questions remaining about what Bill's relationship there was, those are for Bill to answer.
Okay.
But I made it very clear how I felt about him.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that Melinda had some real qualms about Bill's relationship with Epstein. But see, everything that Bill does is wrapped up in the PR stunt of philanthropy. Filmmaker Mickey Willis looked deeply into this. When Bill Gates was put on the stand to be deposed about Microsoft antitrust allegations, Gates created the Gates Foundation not long after this bad PR. His whole life has been one big PR campaign to cover up for missteps. So when you think about all of the Epstein connections, that would surely be enough to make Melinda leave. I'm shocked that she is still in business with her ex-husband for the foundation, because surely she, above anyone, knows the extent of his misdeeds masquerading in philanthropy. After all, it's exactly what Epstein did. He was trafficking while holding expensive fundraisers in the name of charity. But what did that do? It created a community of big donors who had big appetites, and I don't just mean for caviar and martinis. So let's go back to the pandemic for a moment. The Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum helped stage something called Event 201, a pandemic planning simulation, which happened just 6 months before the actual COVID pandemic. Many of the scenarios they posited became incredibly real. This was an exercise in manipulation in a crisis and what global citizens could do. There's also a Global Citizen Festival with big music acts as they try to get young people engaged in these neo-socialist themes. And that's a great plan because young people are impressionable and will listen to the musings of naive entertainers. In Gates' notes, a blog spot for Bill, he even has the gall to say, quote, "If you want to know more about pandemic prevention, you may want to check out my book, or wait for the paperback to come out next summer, end quote. Nothing quite says pandemic prevention like a book by Bill Gates that's for purchase, especially after you already funded a global pandemic planning exercise but could seemingly do nothing to stop the very problems your exercise raised. For instance, if you know and hypothesize that PPE will be in shortage, what can you do to make it abundant? Could you have created factories to mass produce it 6 months before COVID broke out? If you knew it might come from a lab doing gain-of-function research, why was there no recommendation to the NIH, the CDC, or WHO to cease this type of research? I can't blame Bill Gates for not doing anything to help if he didn't know. But all of these problems were not a surprise. I mean, what about hospital beds? See, Gates was only focused on one singular thing, the vaccine. I didn't see him invest in any technology, resources, or groups that might soften the blow of the impact or provide a solution for the real-world scenarios of supply chain crises. Why did he not advocate for a daily dose of vitamin D? That's a very cheap vitamin. Look, if he helped the United States become the most efficient and resilient place in the world to be during a pandemic, to be the model, then I'd say, yeah, let's replicate that all over the world. And then, bam, that's your global citizen. But if he and the WEF foresaw the business closures and economic impact, nobody did a thing about it. He just focused on the jab. China has been perhaps the most draconian about lockdowns, even currently, yet they still cannot stop new variants. I mean, aren't they all vaxxed by this point? China became the model for what not to do. And speaking of big health organizations, the WHO is beholden to China, which makes it incapable of investigating the Wuhan lab without bias. To that end, our governing health bodies cannot be fully trusted. Our own Anthony Fauci cannot be trusted. What concerns me is that all of this is done in the name of doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people, when clearly health is not a one-size-fits-all remedy. Gates says that he wants to give all his wealth back to society, but everything he's investing in has profitability. And if these smart cities are any indication, he wants a digitally driven, AI-based world, which might not be that far off from the technology behind Ectolife, which I just covered in past episodes. And if his goal is to help poverty-stricken nations, why is he not buying land in Africa? Why is he not creating the world's first smart city in the poorest places in the world? If it's viable, it would stand to reason that they would benefit the most, would they not? Why did he pick Arizona? And I'm being serious about this. A demo model of a smart city with GMO food and automated cars and AI ultrasounds would be fascinating to see. I just wonder why it's not being piloted in Zimbabwe or Kenya. He could have been the savior of Ukraine if he could get electricity and ample food to those people. And I have to wonder why he'd buy all that farmland under a covert LLC. Doesn't his relationship with Epstein concern you? I mean, Epstein was a global citizen himself. He trotted the globe on the Lolita Express. How's that for helping inequity, carbon emissions, and poverty? Gates claims that his life's work is done through the lens of being a father and soon to be grandfather. But what kind of example has he set? I'm not saying that his wealth has not been used for scientific progress. It very well may have been, especially on Alzheimer's. But this notion of a push for globalism strikes a certain sterile tone. It lacks patriotism, it lacks gratitude, and perhaps just as importantly, it lacks the value statement that one would expect from an American entrepreneur turned billionaire. It draws sharp contrast to Elon Musk, who created the technology to send Starlink satellites into space so that rural areas have access to the internet. But not just the internet, a platform where free speech and information are possible. That's a game changer. Bill Gates' push for vaccines limits the scientific conversation, so I can't see that he and his global citizen initiative are open-minded. Neil Young's Spotify Joe Rogan kerfuffle was an article on the website. So if Musk is for free speech and reasonable objection, and Gates is about uniform thinking, who is the real philanthropist? According to Open Secrets, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation donated 83% to Democrats in 2020 and upped that to 85% in 2022. According to financial journalist Robbie Yeager, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave nearly $70 million last year to a major liberal charity, Arabella Advisors' new venture fund, that acts as the parent organization of one of the largest pro-Democrat dark money groups, a recent update to the group's online grant database reveals. It was the largest one-year commitment the foundation has made since 2014, and its second largest ever. So again, this all fits in with the socialist leanings of Global Citizen. It all adds up and ties in. Think about BLM. Think about oppressor-oppression narratives. Think about this notion of equity. It all goes hand in hand. To me, being a global citizen means redirecting your resources and attention away from your native land, borders, and even your own identity, and sacrificing it for others who may not have your best interests in mind. That's not to say that others don't need help, or that a person should only be altruistic for their own kind. But we have a situation in the world where generosity has been taken advantage of. Poor countries, and let's use Haiti as an example, are places where flooding them with money after an earthquake ends up getting in the hands of the corrupt rather than those in need. Even Ukraine is a country that has been quite corrupt for decades. Bill Gates is asking you to become a global citizen. That's more than just signing petitions. That's giving. And while I would never try to deter someone from being compassionate and charitable, I worry about where the money goes and what it's being used for. But here's a fundamental irony. If the Global Citizen Initiative has roots in socialist or Marxist theory, it is ironic that many of the countries that are affected most by what you might call inequality or a poor way of life are governed by left-wing and socialist governments. Think about Cuba, China, Venezuela, and actually most of South America. So rather than implementing the change that is needed to lift these countries out of poverty, we tend to just put a Band-Aid on it. Whom did the Paris Climate Accords help? The most polluting countries. Whom did the Iran deal help? Iran. Who got the better deal out of the Griner trade for the Merchant of Death? Russia. So when you do these big global initiatives so that you can shake hands and cut ribbons, who are they really benefiting? If you want to end poverty, what are you doing to force the governments of these countries to show transparency of how they're using donations? That's really the million or billion-dollar question here. It's kind of like the panhandler on the street corner. If you give him money, will he use it for food or a fifth of Jack Daniels? We don't know. I just think that Bill Gates' involvement in all of this makes it suspicious. You can't charity wash your reputation. Throwing money at a problem won't fix it. It requires dedication and transparency. But what we do know is that a lot of the money behind this goes into marketing and promotion and putting on a festival. Because Gates does this all through billion-dollar philanthropy, it's hard to criticize him. And he pays the salaries of the very groups bound to hold him accountable. It's a serious conflict of interest, in addition to the big tax write-offs he receives, which is therefore our money. So what is a global citizen? Well, I think it's a person who might be falling for a marketing scheme developed by people who make money off of pseudo-philanthropy. The people at the top, like Gates, go largely unchecked. Since her divorce, Melinda Gates has said, quote, "I think philanthropy is most effective when it prioritizes flexibility over ideology," unquote. Global Citizen seems highly ideology-driven. I'm Bo, and that's the show.